There's breaking news of a tragic nature to report this afternoon on NEA Report. Stan Morris reporting along with you just a short time after noon, Central Time here in Jonesboro, Arkansas, across the river, also Central Time in Memphis. The report coming in to us that Brian Christopher, also Brian Lawler, that would be his actual birth name, but he wrestled as Brian Christopher, also as Grandmaster Sexay. The man has passed away. We are learning this hour. This has been reported across the internet this morning for quite a bit of time. However, we have just a short time ago, we were able to confirm this through a couple of tweets. There was one tweet that had been sent out by Jarrett, one of the local promoters in Memphis that worked for years with Jerry the King Lawler, another promoter, and by the way, the father of Brian Christopher. Also, Dave Meltzer is reporting this as well. I'm going to bring up the tweets on the screen so you can see it at this time. This is a very, very difficult tragedy, especially with what led up to it. Apparently, Christopher had been, and I'm just going to be running through the report. This is according to TMZ. Brian Christopher, had reportedly been speeding and swerving around the road at 1 a.m. on July 7th. According to reports, he failed to stop when police tried to pull him over, but he then stopped and allegedly reeked of booze, according to the reports. He was also found to have an open 12-ounce can in his center console. He was arrested and booked for DUI and evading arrest. It was the second arrest for Brian Christopher over the summer. He was arrested in downtown Memphis on June 7th after allegedly leaving a Hampton Inn hotel without paying. The man that we're talking about had been taken to jail, and the reports were that he was hospitalized last night after he attempted to hang himself. The report stated the situation was dire. That was being reported late yesterday, early this morning. The family members were told, apparently, that he was not expected to survive, and they were brought in over the night. Family members were hopefully all able to be there with him during this time. Of course, we're still learning all about it. Christopher wrestled in, and I keep mentioning Christopher, that was his wrestling name, his stage name. His name is Brian Lawler. Brian Lawler wrestled in the WWE from 1997 until the year 2001 when he was released. He was a tag team champion there. He was also, at the time, he actually pioneered the light heavyweight division with Taka Michinoku. In 1997, if you go back and watch when he first made his debut in the WWE, Brian Lawler, he was being played as being close to Jerry the King Lawler, but they pretended as though Lawler was not his father. Fans actually chanted Jerry's kid at the pro wrestler, Brian Christopher, and of course he would participate in what would be called selling, in that he acted as though that infuriated him and made him very angry. It was all part of the show, if you will, that is pro wrestling, a show that has taken many lives, younger than they should have been whenever they passed away. Unfortunately, pro wrestling has a high death toll due to both the damage and the physical injuries that are sustained, but also just the nature of the lifestyle. It's a traveling lifestyle. You're always on the road. You're always in pain. And it becomes very difficult for some people to manage that. I want to take to social media for a moment, as we have a lot of people joining us, because on social media there are a number of messages that are being posted right now. We're seeing some wrestlers post messages. There's the Blue Meanie, a pro wrestler who's in WWE, also in ECW. This is trending right now on Twitter. I also want to mention, too, for pro wrestling fans, here's a video gif, or a clip, so to speak, of Brian Christopher as Grandmaster Sexay. I want to mention 3 pro wrestlers, apparently in the last 24 hours, have passed away. Brian Christopher is the pro wrestler with local connections here to Northeast Arkansas. But Nikolai Volkov has reportedly passed away, and a pro wrestler, Brickhouse Brown. 3 pro wrestling names passing away in the past 24 hours, a devastating period of time. This is probably what I'm showing you right here is a GIF of probably what was the most famous time for Lawler. I apologize for that skipping around like that just a bit. So Lawler was a part of the group called Too Cool. He was Grandmaster Sexay. His tag team partner was Scotty Too Hottie. The guy on the left with the hat and the tall hair. He would do what was called the worm or whatnot. It became a very famous move. When Brian Lawler left the company, Scotty Too Hottie remained for many years after. We're seeing some wishes there from some folks taking pictures with Brian Lawler. He looks a remarkable amount like his father, who of course was and is Jerry the King Lawler. Jerry the King Lawler's own battles have been difficult over the year. He actually suffered a heart attack on the air live on Monday Night Raw several years back, but he did make a full recovery. His father, Jerry the King Lawler, is someone that, of course, is a wrestling legend around here, Northeast Arkansas and in the Mid-South, but also someone that has, as his autobiography states, never touched a substance in his life, according to the King, never even drank. We know that, as you can see in some of the old videos on the WWE Network, actually Jerry the King Lawler would be in the ring with Stone Cold, and Stone Cold would hand him a beer, and Lawler would set it down. Not sure, you know, as I mentioned, that's just a point to make in the sense of he had a very strong personal conviction against that. That being Jerry the King Lawler. At the moment, it's very difficult for us. We're seeing there the post from TMZ Sports just about 3 minutes ago of Brian Lawler, the son of Jerry the King Lawler, and a wrestling legend known by many, having passed away. There's a photo by a fan of Brian Christopher and Nikolai Volkov, two legendary wrestling names. Losing both of those names, along with Brickhouse Brown, within the same day is a blow to the wrestling community. And for those of you who don't know, there is a subculture, a sub-community of wrestling fans who follow pro wrestling and who care deeply about not just the sport. It is a sport, athletic event. It may not be a sporting event of a competition's sake, but it is an athletic event and a performance for sure. But a lot of people care about the performers too, and they know more about them. Brian Christopher was the performer's stage name, but the man's name is Brian Lawler. He passed away 46 years old, sources close to the family say, and the family not yet ready to make a statement based on the most recent reports that have been posted online. I did reach out to some local wrestling news sources and regional wrestling news sources that I have, and they were discussing how that they had been in touch with the family last night, and it's been a very difficult case for them. For those of you who are unaware, and I know that this is a tremendously tragic tale to have to report here. I'm going to run over the details again here, as Brian Christopher was apparently, or Brian Lawler was apparently arrested earlier this month on allegations of a DUI and evading police. This was in Tennessee, of course, not very far across the river there from us here in NEA. The reports were, according to TMZ, he was arrested, and the report that came in late last night was that he had hanged himself in the jail. He was taken to a hospital where he was in grave condition and not expected to survive as of last night, and family was brought in that very difficult setting. And Brian Christopher, you know, he had a heck of a run from 97 to 2001. He was a very, very famous name on the national scene for a while. For a point in time, he was well known as a bad guy, as a wrestling heel. The photo I'm showing you there, which is the one we used in our graphic earlier on Twitter, that's when he became a good guy, a babyface, as they're called in the pro wrestling world. Grandmaster Sexay. He, along with Scotty 2 Hotty and the big man known as Rikishi, would all come out and dance to rap music, basically. Not really rap music, but it was kind of a hip-hop beat. A beat composed, actually, by Pocahontas native Jim Johnston. A lot of people don't know that the man who made WWE music comes from Pocahontas, Arkansas. Christopher was on top of the world during that period of time, 2000 and leading into 2001. Unfortunately, he did not remain in the WWE. There was a lot of documented issues of substance abuse over the man's life, unfortunately. Very sad as you look back at that. That's the tag team I was telling you about, being Too Cool with Brian Christopher and Scotty 2 Hotty. As I'm going through here, I want to show you a photo of, this is Brickhouse Brown, one of the individuals I mentioned earlier who also has passed away, a pro wrestler within the last 24 hours, and Nikolai Volkov, now learning here also of Grandmaster Sexay. Brian Lawler, known Brian Christopher as well, passing away. Very sad day for pro wrestlers, for the pro wrestling community, for all of us in Northeast Arkansas too. It was a couple of years back in Jonesboro at Automax that Brian Christopher actually performed. He came with his father. I had a chance to speak with him. Also had a chance to speak with Dirty Dutch Mantell. It was a period of time that you know, for a wrestling fan, is not one that you would expect to ever live. My cousin and I, my cousin Josh Foster with the moving company, we actually had a chance to meet Brian Christopher, and he wasn't looking too good there. Just gonna be blunt about it, right? And that's very unfortunate. It's very unfortunate the way that his life ended here. Remembering more fond times for him, I want to do that for a moment, because over the past several months, just coincidentally, I've been studying the period of time during it was late 1997 when Brian Christopher had a series of incredible matches with Taka Michinoku, and he had kind of a less talked about feud in pro wrestling. Brian Christopher was wrestling in what was called the light heavyweight division. He was the weight limit, he said. I think they were just basically, you know, making a spin on it. And he had just come in from the USWA, the Memphis wrestling organization, after he said, and this was his words on an episode, he done beat everybody up down there. Now he was here to beat everybody up in the WWE. At that time, he began a feud with Japanese wrestling name, and a legendary name at that, Taka Michinoku. He had just been signed by the WWE, and they needed to get this Japanese wrestling legend name over. In other words, they needed the crowd to buy into the character and to support it. So how do you do that? Well, they needed a talent, somebody that was capable of showcasing not just his own skills, but the skills of that of someone that had you know, been less known and been imported into our culture. Well, Brian Lawler was the talent that they needed. And so Brian Lawler was brought in. Brian Christopher, he played the bad guy. He would do this really annoying laugh. It was a straight bad guy laugh, and he would get the crowd fired up. And so you had a good guy in the form of Taka Michinoku, and I think I misspelled his name here. Forgive me, Taka's. But you had Taka, who nobody knew. However, they were still cheering him because the guy he was fighting, Brian Christopher, was so hated that they couldn't help but cheer for someone who might get a chance to beat him up. That is somebody that is good at their craft. Brian Christopher was a talent at what he did in the ring, and especially outside of the ring with the audience in the form of engaging and riling them up. He was incredibly skilled at that. He also, during a few years back when we were, I want to say, doing some radio stuff on KISS FM, I asked him, I said, hey, are you up for doing a quick interview, like a radio hit? He turned on the pro wrestler just like a snap of your fingers and did a wrestling promo with me on the radio. Cut it, was incredible. And then as soon as we were off the radio, he went back to just being Brian Lawler, you know, regular guy. My cousin was there with me and told me that's pretty neat to see how that he switched on the performer and you know, went into that performance mode. He is somebody that has personal friendships and relationships with, or he was, I should say, with many here in Northeast Arkansas. Some of the people that I spoke with a short time ago were reminiscing about his life and about the different experiences that they particularly had shared with him, as we mentioned, with pro wrestling being a difficult, grinding, and grueling profession that people have to go up and down the roads in. You're going to have a lot of close-knit families. You're going to have a lot of close-knit relationships come out of that. And Brian Christopher had those, especially here in Northeast Arkansas. For those asking, I'm seeing some folks asking in chat what had happened. He had reportedly hanged himself in jail. He had been arrested on a DUI. It was not a serious charge, but when you're a famous name and you get arrested, then people put that out there and make a bigger deal of it than it is. If, you know, normal human being gets arrested for DUI, it's usually not covered in the news. It was covered pretty heavily in Memphis news for Brian Christopher. And, you know, that's part of the job, I guess, of a news person, but for somebody that's going through depression and that's dealing with a lot of emotional toughness, you know, that probably weighed heavily on him in addition to the problems he was battling inside of his own psyche. A lot of sympathy from this reporter is with the family. You know, people battle depression all of the time, and they put a face on that makes you think that they're happy, and then you take time to get to know them, and they may not be. They may be anything but. In fact, sometimes the people that smile the most on the outside, remember Robin Williams as an example of the people that may not be smiling at all on the inside. He made the world laugh, and yet he was broken inside. And we don't have good mental health facilities. We don't have good mental health treatment currently. We have some good people trying, and we have some good facilities giving their all, but we don't have things to where we need them in America for mental health care. We need to get there. That would help a lot of things. That would help people that suffer from depression you know, in looking back at so many cases where people commit suicide or attempt suicide and later, you know, pass, as is the case here. It's impossible not to think of the pain that the family's going through, and they must have gone through, and also at the same time, for me, I think, what could we do, what could we have done, and what can we maybe do in the future? Because this is tough, a tough life for every one of us. You know, there's even the best days are very difficult to get through for some, and for many, you know, it's probably a struggle to get out of bed. I can't imagine what it must have been like to have made a national fame, to have reached the level of being on USA Network every week, and to have millions and millions of dollars worth of airtime devoted to you. And to have that from 1997 to 2001, and then to lose that, had to be crushing. And he never got it back. He struggled afterwards for many years. Since 2001, he, you know, Brian struggled, and had a lot of falls, so to speak. And it was just a tragedy, because you think to yourself what could have been, and he, it's worth noting, came back not too terribly long ago, but it was for a very, very brief, almost cameo appearance. The WWE brought him back and there was an incident where he had come down and did kind of an interview opposing his dad, and when Brian come out, when they played his music from his Too Sexy days, the Grandmaster Sexay music. When he came out, he did his signature dance. I don't know if I'll be able to find a video showing that here, but he did that, and the crowd popped. They erupted after all these years when they saw him, because here he was. I mean, he had incredibly talented dance moves he would pull whenever he would come out in his entrance. And for those who watch wrestling, they will tell you that wrestling is as much the entrance as it is the match itself. If you have a really cool entrance, think of it like this: The Undertaker has a longer entrance sometimes than his matches would be. A lot of other pro wrestlers like Bray Wyatt, who come out and they have the lights all over the arena, they have more of an entrance than they have a match. Well, Brian Lawler's entrance was doing these incredible dance moves when he would come down to the ring, and the crowd would still react to that whenever they would see that, even in the 2010s, which was an incredible thing to see. I know that he had to, that had to be a special moment for him, but I also, sympathize with how difficult he must have had a time reckoning with, making it to that stage and then falling from there. And it's tough because nobody teaches a psychology class on what it's like to make it and to be famous. That just doesn't exist. So when you get there and then you lose it, some people blame themselves. And in this instance, I think Brian Lawler probably carried a guilt around, but he shouldn't have. He was good at what he did, and we all are not expected to spend, even if we make it to that high, so to speak, even if we make it to that incredible top level, you can't stay there forever. Nobody does unless you own the company. So you have a good run, and then you do more things. But that's got to be the lesson for anything. Even if you work at a place and you work there for 10 years and you leave after 11, you shouldn't consider it a failure. You look at those 10 years as a successful run. And I would say somebody that wins the tag team championships, that gets over with a tag team and does a pretty good job as a bad guy too, he had a successful run in the WWE. He was also booked around Northeast Arkansas all the time. I recall him being in Automax, not too terribly, several years back, and I was out there, I was looking for photos. He and I, and somebody mentioned they can't hear, but the audio should be working fine. Of course, if I'm telling you how to fix it, you're not hearing me, then that's futile, so I'm sorry. But he was at Automax not long ago. He, Dutch Mantel, Jerry the King Lawler, and Brian Christopher wasn't advertised, but he showed up with his dad, was incredibly nice to myself, my cousin Josh. He was really neat, gave us interviews on the air, and was a very kind guy. It's just sad because, here is somebody that had talent, had ability, and proved it, but also had to grow up and to live in the shadow of the most famous pro wrestler in the South, Jerry the King Lawler. And that's challenging. That creates a total psyche difference that we can't understand, and probably few could who have not spent serious time studying it. But in the Memphis world and in the wrestling world in the Mid-South, Jerry the King Lawler is the name. So from day one, it was going to be a challenge to follow, right? And so he had to assume a different name, Brian Christopher. But everyone knew, and they played with it a little bit. And I remember there even being a shoot interview, I think one time with maybe Eddie Gilbert, but somebody will correct. Maybe Doug Gilbert. Maybe that's what it was. Let me know if you know what I'm talking about. But where they mentioned him as being, Jerry Lawler's son. So he went by the name Brian Christopher, but he looks in the photo there, identical just about to Jerry the King Lawler. He looked, the facial features and stuff is clear, you know, who that was. So when he went to WWE at 97, he took the name Brian Christopher. But Jim Ross would always give him grief and say, "There's your boy, King, there's your boy coming down," and so, you know, and King would say, "What are you talking about? That's not my son. He's just a really good-looking athlete." You know, and so Lawler would play into it, and Jerry the King Lawler would play it up and pretend as though it was, you know, it was not his kid, but he just really admired this young athlete. And he would interfere in Brian Christopher's matches, and Brian Christopher would come out and interfere in Lawler's matches. I just mention all this because in the past several months, I've spent an incredible amount of time going through and looking at and actually studying 97 and 98 in pro wrestling again. And I noticed those interactions with he and his child. And that had to be a special time, right? Because for him to be interacting with his father, who is a wrestling legend, on the WWE stage is a big deal. And, you know, there he was. I mean, there he was in one of the top angles, so to speak, one of the top gimmicks or stories on television. And Brian Christopher and his father were involved in it. You know, they would change the gimmick up a little bit to where Brian Christopher would end up going on his own. Like I said, he would adopt this sort of hip-hop style gimmick, and he played it over the top, which is how you have to do it in WWE. It's a very over-the-top entertainment form, pro wrestling and sports entertainment in the form of WWE and all of it. And when he did that, at first, it started as a bad guy gimmick, a heel gimmick, the Too Cool, Grandmaster Sexay and Scotty Too Hottie. It started as a bad guy thing. They were so entertaining with their silly dance moves and the way that they would come out dressed in these wild-looking glasses. Let me show you what I'm talking about here, like that one. You know, he had two pairs of glasses on, one on his eyes, one on the sock cap. And they would come out. They were so entertaining that the crowd, which was supposed to boo Too Cool and Brian Christopher, ended up cheering for him. They couldn't stop cheering for them. And they realized, WWE realized, we have a hit. This is getting over. And so Brian Christopher became Grandmaster Sexay, which was, you know, again, an over-the-top way to do a spin on the hip-hop thing. And I can't recall his last name. Somebody will help me out here. But the gentleman, the other tag team partner, was Scotty Too Hottie. And that's how that they adopted those characters that they ended up becoming the World Tag Team Champions under. It was also, I want to point out, 2001 was the year that Grandmaster Sexay was released, Brian Christopher. 2001 was also the year that the WWE purchased WCW. They purchased their main competitor. And when that happened, you know, a lot of folks lost the opportunity to work for a big style company. However, you know, when it cuts the jobs in half, it puts a lot of people back onto the independents. It was around that time that you know, Brian Christopher, Brian Lawler, as he was actually named, left the WWE, and you know, he returned for a few matches and a few stints. However, he never quite you know, remained as far as staying there for a long time. I was going back here to look at the release of when he was released. It looks like he showed up to the May 8, 2001 Louisiana house show before 15 minutes before the start of the event. It says they told him several times if it happened again, he would be fined. So it was a short time later that actual release had happened. So it's strange. I guess that there was some difficulties around that time too. For those just joining the live stream, tragic news today. Brian Christopher, a wrestling name from the Mid-South that we know here in Jonesboro, Arkansas, where we're broadcasting live at, but many know from across the United States and across the globe. He was known as Grandmaster Sexay, Too Sexy Brian Christopher, and to his family and friends known as Brian Lawler. He passed away earlier today, with his family and friends around him at a Memphis hospital. The reports are that he had attempted to hang himself in jail last night. Rather, I shouldn't say attempted. He hanged himself in jail, in a Memphis jail where he was at. Brian's had difficulties over the past several months. He was in jail on a DUI, a minor charge, but you know, for somebody in the celebrity style spotlight, everything small gets blown up in the media and it feels enormous. So late last night, Christopher attempted and hanged himself. The situation was grim, and family was called in. He was not expected to survive, and he did pass away, succumb to his injuries today. The reports confirming it have been from Dave Meltzer, a wrestling news reporter who has many years reporting on the internet. Also, Jarrett, who is a Memphis wrestling legend, someone that booked Memphis with Jerry the King Lawler, also confirming the passing there. It's a tragic situation for Christopher and for his family, for Lawler, and for those joining us. It's one of 3 names in the wrestling world that have passed away over the past 24 hours. Nikolai Volkov reportedly passing away, and also Brickhouse Brown, another wrestling name, reportedly passing away. The pro wrestling business, as much as many of us love it, and myself being one of those people that considers it a form of entertainment that I do enjoy, especially when I'm trying to get away from the difficult grind of the news business and how serious it is here. Pro wrestling is a fun outlet. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be entertainment. But it also takes a grueling toll on the physical body. There are no unions for pro wrestlers. There should be. There's no health care for pro wrestlers unless they get it on their own. There are rarely benefits. And that's when we're talking about for the top company in the world, the publicly traded WWE, which is actually involved in the current presidential administration, with the former CEO, Linda McMahon, being the Small Business Administrator's chief administrator. It's not much better when you get out of the big company and you go down to the organizations, the smaller ones. They are not, pro wrestlers being the ones I'm talking about, they're not well taken care of. And sadly, they have to take care of themselves in many situations, which results sometimes in the tragedies that we have seen take place so often in the wrestling world. Brian Christopher passing away. An earlier report said wrestled in Memphis, across Northeast Arkansas, which is where we broadcast from. Of course, in the WWF, at the time now known as WWE, from 2001 back to 1997. It was a run he had there for about 5 years. He was the son of Jerry the King Lawler, and former tag team champion, as I mentioned, in the WWE. Very sad situation today to have to bring along to everybody. A wrestler that I've watched a lot in the past few months as I've been going back through 1997 and 1998. Those were some of his best times in WWE. He came in, they brought him in, they were giving him one heck of an opportunity to showcase what he had, and he did that. And he helped get over Taka Michinoku, who was the first light heavyweight champion. Nobody knew who Taka was. He couldn't speak the English. He couldn't speak the English language, and now here he was getting cheered for because the guy he was fighting was so hated. That being Brian Christopher, because Brian Christopher was doing his job. He was making the crowd hate him. I don't have a date of passing on Brickhouse Brown. He may have passed in the past week. I was just learning about that passing this morning, so I stand corrected potentially on that. I can tell you that Brian Lawler's passing is one that has taken place in the past 24 hours. and apparently Nikolai Volkov, news of his passing just coming across the wire over the past 24 hours too. Sad situation for wrestling fans to have to contend with the loss of several names, several big names. The man on the right is Brian Lawler in the photo there. That was him as his character Grandmaster Sexay. He played that character over the top and did it so well. He started out as a bad guy and became a good guy. That's when you know you've done something good, is when you are so good at it, you're supposed to be getting booed and they can't stop cheering for you because you're so entertaining. And he was. He wore 2 sets of sunglasses in this photo shoot you're looking at right there. But he also did enough to where whenever he would come out and play with the crowd, he would put those glasses on when he did his Tennessee Jam leg drop off of the top rope. Brian Christopher, as he was then known as, Grandmaster Sexay, teamed up with Scotty 2 Hotty, and they did make the World Tag Team Championship scene. They also helped make Rikishi, the big guy in the middle who had a number of failed gimmicks leading up to this one. And it was this one and the work with Scotty 2 Hotty and Grandmaster Sexay that got him over. He ended up doing work with The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin too, which could be directly linked to his work with now late Brian Lawler. A talent that is going to be difficult for many people to grasp with just how talented he was. A very underappreciated talent. Someone that is often not remembered and given the credit that he should be because of the difficulties in the personal, as many people call it, demons. It's difficulties. Addiction is a disease. As many things begin as choices, but they become impulsory obligations. It was one that affected his life for a great many years. It affected him to the degree that earlier in the month he was arrested for a DUI. He was arrested for evading police, and the Memphis news media blew it up. I'm not blaming them. Please don't take it that way. That's what happens when a celebrity gets in trouble. It becomes the news. But when a man who was a big celebrity falls from the heights that he had been at and then ends up being in the news for an arrest, it can be devastating on the psyche, and it was. Brian Lawler hanged himself at a jail, and last night was taken to a Memphis hospital where he was in grave condition, and his family was brought in to say their goodbyes, and earlier today he passed. The family's going to be issuing a statement at some point. We've read in reports. We're going to keep following this, and our condolences are with the family and friends, especially those who may have known Brian, who are listening to and watching this, as I know that's very likely, considering he knew many across NEA. Our hopes are that if someone is watching this, that you know that someone cares and there's always someone to speak to. Please don't give up. And in this case, if you know people close, please reach out. Very sad day. Brian Christopher, Brian Lawler, the son of Jerry the King Lawler, passing away, 46 years old today.